Danny Carter was not supposed to be here. He was a wildlife guy from Montana, a man who spent his days feeding injured animals and cleaning cages. He was not a diplomat. He was not a politician. He was just a regular person who happened to have the right paperwork at the wrong time. 3 days ago, the real delegate got sick. Some kind of stomach bug that put him in the hospital. Earth needed someone to go to the Galactic Unity Summit, and they needed that person fast. Danny had clearance because of a research project he worked on 2 years back, something about animal behavior studies that required government approval. He never thought that paperwork would send him to space. Now he stood in the boarding area of Kennedy Space Center, holding a reinforced carrier in his right hand. Inside that carrier was Gus. Gus was a Wolverine. He weighed about 30 pounds, had dark brown fur, and possessed the kind of attitude that made grizzly bears think twice. Danny had raised him from a pup after finding him orphaned in the wilderness. The mother had been killed by a truck on a mountain road. Gus was barely alive when Danny found him, small enough to fit in one hand. That was 2 years ago. Now Gus was fully grown and he had bonded with Danny in the way Wolverines sometimes do. He tolerated Danny. He accepted food from Danny. He even let Danny touch him sometimes. But he trusted no one else, and separating them would cause the animal serious stress. So Danny did what he had to do. He filed some creative paperwork, called Gus an emotional support animal, and brought him along. The shuttle ride took 6 hours. Danny sat in a small cabin with the carrier strapped to the seat beside him. Gus slept most of the way, which was good. A stressed Wolverine in an enclosed space was not something anyone wanted to deal with. The other passengers on the shuttle were mostly human diplomats and their staff. A few of them looked at the carrier with curiosity, but no one asked questions. Danny was grateful for that. When the shuttle finally docked at Station 7, Danny felt his stomach drop. Through the small window, he could see the station clearly. It was massive. The main structure was shaped like a wheel, spinning slowly to create artificial gravity. Lights blinked across its surface, and smaller ships moved around it like fish swimming near a reef. Beyond the station, a purple and gold nebula stretched across the darkness of space. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Danny had never felt so small in his entire life. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Danny stepped into the station. The air smelled different here. Clean, but with a strange metallic taste that made his throat feel dry. The corridor was wide and tall, designed for species much larger than humans. The walls were a pale blue color, smooth and featureless. Signs in multiple languages pointed toward different sections of the station. Danny recognized none of the alien scripts. A woman was waiting for him at the end of the corridor. She was tall, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they looked at. She wore a formal suit with a small Earth flag pinned to her lapel. This was Ambassador Vance, Earth's permanent representative to the Galactic Unity. Danny had seen her picture in the briefing materials, but she looked more intimidating in person. "You must be Carter," she said. Her voice was flat, neither friendly nor unfriendly. "Yes, ma'am, Danny Carter." Her eyes dropped to the carrier in his hand. Something moved inside it. Its expression did not change, but Danny saw her jaw tighten slightly. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. Danny considered lying. He decided against it. "It's a Wolverine. His name is Gus. He's certified." "Certified," repeated. She did not sound convinced. "He has all his shots, and the paperwork is filed. Emotional support animal." Stared at him for a long moment. Then she sighed, the kind of sigh that carried the weight of too many problems and not enough solutions. "Fine, but if that thing causes an incident, you're on the next shuttle home. Understood?" "Understood." They walked through the station together, explained the basics as they went. The Galactic Unity was made up of 12 spacefaring species. Humans were the members, admitted only 18 months ago. Most of the other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. To them, humans were children, newcomers, primitives who had barely figured out how to leave their own planet. "They don't respect us," said bluntly. They see us as weak. Our technology is behind theirs by centuries. Our bodies are fragile compared to most of them. They tolerate us because the Unity Charter requires it, but they don't take us seriously. Danny listened quietly. He was beginning to understand why this assignment had been so hard to fill. No one wanted to stand in a room full of ancient alien civilizations and be looked down upon. They reached Danny's quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out at the nebula. Handed him a data pad with the summit schedule. "The welcome reception is in 4 hours," she said. "Try to look presentable, and for the love of everything, keep that animal under control." She left without another word. Danny set the carrier on the floor and opened the door. Gus emerged slowly, his nose twitching as he took in the new smells. His small dark eyes scanned the room, checking for threats. Finding none, he wandered over to a corner and curled up on the floor. Danny sat on the bed and stared at the data pad. The schedule was packed with meetings, presentations, and diplomatic functions. Names he could not pronounce, species he had never heard of. He was completely out of his depth. But he was here now. There was no going back. He looked at Gus, who had already fallen asleep in the corner. The Wolverine's chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. Despite everything, Danny felt a little better. At least he was not alone. 4 hours later, Danny put on the nicest clothes he had brought. They were not very nice. A button-down shirt that was slightly wrinkled, pants that were meant for field work but were the best he owned. He looked at himself in the small mirror on the wall and sighed. "Good enough," he muttered. He looked at Gus, still sleeping in the corner. He should leave him here. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But Gus did not like being left alone. The last time Danny had left him in an unfamiliar place, the Wolverine had torn apart a door trying to get out. Danny picked up the carrier. "Come on, buddy, we're going to a party." Gus opened one eye, looked at Danny, and made a low grumbling sound that might have been annoyance. But he walked into the carrier without too much fuss. Danny latched the door and headed for the grand atrium. He had no idea what was waiting for him there. The grand atrium was the largest room Danny had ever seen. The ceiling was a massive dome made of transparent material, and through it he could see the swirling colors of the nebula outside. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the lights that floated in the air without any visible support. Hundreds of beings moved through the space, talking in languages that sounded like music or clicking or rumbling like distant thunder. Danny stood near the entrance, the carrier at his feet, trying not to stare. He had seen pictures of aliens before, but pictures did not prepare him for this. Some of them were humanoid, walking on 2 legs with 2 arms, their bodies covered in scales or feathers or skin of colors that did not exist on Earth. Others were nothing like humans at all. One being looked like a floating jellyfish, its tentacles trailing behind it as it drifted through the crowd. Another was a massive creature with 6 legs and a body covered in thick gray plates, like a living tank. Ambassador appeared at his side. She had changed into a formal gown that made her look even more intimidating than before. "Stay near the refreshment area," she said quietly. "Smile, nod, don't say anything stupid." Before Danny could respond, she was gone, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. Danny made his way to the refreshment area. The tables were covered with food and drinks from dozens of worlds. Some of it looked normal. Some of it looked like it might try to eat him if he got too close. He picked up something that looked like a glass of water and hoped for the best. It tasted like water with a hint of something sweet. Good enough. He stood there for a while, watching the crowd and trying to be invisible. It did not work. A group of aliens approached him. The one in front was tall and thin, with a body made of segments like an insect. Its head was triangular, with large compound eyes that reflected the light in strange patterns. 2 long antennae rose from its forehead, twitching as it studied Danny. Behind it were 2 others of the same species, slightly smaller. "So this is the human delegate," the creature said. Its voice was strange, a mix of clicks and hisses that Danny's translator turned into words. "I am counselor of the Dominion." Danny remembered the briefing materials. They were one of the oldest species in the Unity. They considered themselves superior to almost everyone else. "Danny Carter," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "pleased to meet you," made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. It was not a friendly sound. "Tell me, soft one, is it true that your species still resolves conflicts by striking each other with closed appendages?" Danny blinked. "You mean fighting with fists?" "Yes, fists." Santini twitched. "Such a primitive method. On my world, we evolved past physical violence millions of years ago. We found it inefficient." Other aliens were gathering now, drawn by the conversation. Danny saw creatures of all shapes and sizes forming a loose circle around him. Their eyes, or the organs they used for seeing, were all focused on him. A new voice joined the conversation. This one came from a being that looked like a giant slug, its body glistening with moisture. Danny's translator identified it as a diplomat from the collective. "I have heard something fascinating about humans," said, his voice wet and gurgling. "They keep lesser creatures as companions. They form emotional bonds with non-sapient life forms." His compound eyes seemed to brighten with amusement. "Is this true, human? You share your dwellings with animals, creatures that cannot think or speak." Danny felt his face getting warm. "We call them pets, and yes, many humans have them. Dogs, cats, birds, they're our friends." "Friends," repeated, drawing out the word. "You consider mindless beasts to be your friends. How desperately lonely your species must be." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The sound came in many forms, clicks and whistles and rumbles, but they all meant the same thing: mockery. Another being stepped forward. This one was made of crystal, its body catching the light and breaking it into rainbows. When it spoke, its voice sounded like glass chimes. "I am of the," it said. "I have studied your species. Your world is filled with predators, creatures with claws and teeth that could tear your soft bodies apart. Yet instead of eliminating these threats, you invite them into your homes. You feed them. You sleep beside them." "It sounds like madness," agreed. "Or perhaps stupidity. It is difficult to tell the difference with humans." More laughter. Danny's hands tightened into fists at his sides. He forced himself to relax. Getting angry would not help. "What creature have you brought to this summit, human?" asked, pointing one crystalline limb at the carrier by Danny's feet. "Another one of your domesticated servants, some docile beast bred for submission." Danny looked down at the carrier. Through the mesh door, he could see Gus's dark eyes watching the aliens. The Wolverine was very still, the way he got when he was evaluating something, deciding if it was a threat or prey. "He's not domesticated," Danny said quietly. Bent his segmented body, bringing his face closer to the carrier. His compound eyes studied Gus with obvious contempt. "It looks weak," the counselor said. "Small, soft, like the rest of your species. Tell me, human, does this creature serve any purpose? Or is it simply a comfort for your fragile emotions?" Made a wet sound that might have been a snort. "Perhaps humans need such comforts. Their minds are not strong enough to face the universe alone." Danny said nothing. His jaw was tight. He could feel the anger building inside him, hot and sharp, but he kept it down. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. But Gus was a different story. The Wolverine had been sitting quietly in the carrier, watching the aliens through the mesh. His ears were flat against his skull now. His lips had pulled back slightly, showing the tips of his teeth. Danny recognized the signs. Gus was getting angry. "Perhaps we should examine this creature more closely," said, reaching one chitinous limb toward the carrier door. "See what makes it so precious to the soft little human." Danny's heart jumped. "I wouldn't do that." Ignored him. His limb touched the carrier's latch. And Gus growled. It was a low sound, barely audible over the noise of the reception, but something about it cut through everything else. Something primal, something that spoke directly to the oldest, deepest part of the brain, the part that remembered being small and weak, the part that remembered being hunted. Slim froze. The laughter stopped. For the first time since Danny had arrived on this station, the room was completely silent. The silence lasted only a moment. Then the noise returned, aliens talking and clicking and humming as if nothing had happened. But Danny noticed that several of them had stepped back slightly. The circle around him was wider now. Pulled his limb away from the carrier. His compound eyes were fixed on the mesh door, on the dark shape inside. "What was that sound?" he asked. His voice was different now, less confident than before. "That was Gus telling you to back off," Danny said. Ambassador pushed through the crowd. Her face was calm, but Danny could see tension in the way she held her shoulders. "Perhaps we should move on to more productive conversations," she said smoothly. "The summit has many important topics to discuss." But was not ready to let it go. He straightened his segmented body to its full height, towering over both humans. "I propose a demonstration," he announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Let the human show us his companion. Let us see what Earth considers worthy of affection and protection." The crowd murmured in agreement. Danny saw curious faces turning toward him. Even aliens who had not been part of the mockery seemed interested now. This was entertainment to them, a chance to see the primitive humans embarrassed once again. Leaned close to Danny and spoke quietly. "You don't have to do this. We can leave." Danny considered it. Leaving would be smart, safe, but it would also confirm everything these aliens believed about humanity, that humans were weak, that they ran from challenges, that they did not belong among the stars. He looked down at the carrier. Gus was watching him, those dark eyes calm and steady. The Wolverine did not understand politics or diplomacy. He did not care about proving humanity's worth. He only knew two things: who was friend and who was enemy. "I'll do it," Danny said. His eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure? That animal is not exactly." "I know what he is." Danny knelt beside the carrier and placed his hand on the latch. Around him, the crowd pressed closer, eager to see. Stood at the front, his antennae twitching with anticipation. Slug-like body quivered with excitement. His crystalline form caught the light, scattering rainbows across the floor. "Before I open this," Danny said, looking up at the assembled aliens, "I want to make something clear. What you're about to see is not a pet. Not in the way you're thinking. Gus is a wild animal. He tolerates me because I raised him, but he has never been tamed. He cannot be tamed. His species has been on Earth for millions of years, and in all that time, no human has ever truly domesticated them." Made a clicking sound of amusement. "More excuses, more delays. Open the container, human. Show us your fearsome beast." Danny unlatched the carrier door. Gus emerged slowly. He moved with the careful deliberation of a predator entering unknown territory. His nose twitched as he took in the thousands of new scents. His small round ears swiveled, tracking sounds from every direction. His dark fur bristled slightly, making him look larger than his 30 pounds. The alien stared. Made a wet, bubbling sound. This is what humans bond with. It looks like a malformed ground creature, a pest that crawled out from underground." "It's tiny," another alien said. "Smaller than my youngest offspring." Laughter rippled through the crowd again. The tension that had built during Gus's growl was fading. The aliens saw only a small, furry animal that posed no threat to any of them. Bent down again, bringing his triangular face close to Gus. "I fail to see what is so special about this creature. It has no armor, no venom, no natural weapons that I can observe. How has its species survived on a world filled with predators?" "By being the most aggressive thing in any fight," Danny said quietly. Ignored him. He reached out with one limb, moving slowly toward Gus. Danny's heart pounded. He wanted to grab Gus and pull him away, but he knew that would be a mistake. You did not grab a Wolverine, not even one that trusted you, not unless you wanted to lose fingers. "Counselor," Danny said, his voice tight, "I really would not do that." "You humans worry too much," replied. "I simply wish to examine the creature, to understand why you value it so highly." His limb got closer. Gus remained completely still. His eyes were locked on his face, not on the approaching limb, on the face. Danny recognized that look. It was the same look Gus got when he was watching prey. The other aliens pressed forward, trying to get a better view. Danny could feel their presence all around him, massive bodies and strange shapes forming a wall of flesh and chitin and crystal. There was no way out. If something went wrong, he could not escape. He could only watch. Slim was inches from Gus now. His compound eyes sparkled with amusement and contempt. "You see," said to the crowd, "humans attach themselves to helpless creatures because they themselves are helpless. They lack the strength to stand alone, so they surround themselves with weak companions who make them feel powerful by comparison." Gus's lip curled back slightly, just enough to show his teeth. They were not the teeth of a helpless creature. They were thick and strong, designed for crushing bones and tearing through frozen meat. Wolverines had been known to eat every part of their prey, including hooves and antlers. Their jaws could crack femurs like twigs. Danny saw the moment when noticed the teeth. The limb stopped moving. His antennae went rigid. "What kind of teeth are those?" asked her chiming voice, suddenly uncertain. Danny stood slowly. He kept his movements calm and steady, the way he always did around Gus. "Those are the teeth of a scavenger that evolved to eat frozen carcasses in the middle of winter," he said. "When the temperature drops below freezing and meat turns hard as rock, Gus's species can still feed. They crack through bone like it's nothing. They eat everything. Fur, skin, organs, skeleton, everything." The laughter had stopped again. Gus's ears flattened completely against his skull. His body lowered slightly, muscles coiling beneath his fur. He was not backing down. He was preparing. "On my world," Danny continued, "Wolverines have been documented driving grizzly bears away from kills. Grizzlies weigh over 1,000 pounds. Wolverines weigh 30. But when a Wolverine wants something, it takes it, and nothing short of death will stop it." Slim was still extended, frozen in the air between him and Gus. "Perhaps," the counselor said slowly, "I should withdraw my limb." "That would be wise," Danny agreed. Pulled back carefully. His movements were slow and deliberate, the universal language of not wanting a fight. But it was too late. Gus had already made his decision. The Wolverine did not growl this time. He made a different sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that started in his chest and seemed to fill the entire room. It was not loud, but it carried. Every being in the grand atrium heard it. Every being felt it. It was the sound of something ancient, something that had existed long before any of these species had built their first cities, something that had survived ice ages and mass extinctions and the rise and fall of countless predators. It was the sound of a creature that had never learned to be afraid. And every alien in that room, from the mighty to the crystalline to the gelatinous, felt something they had not felt in generations. They felt like prey. The grand atrium fell silent in a way Danny had never experienced before. It was not just the absence of sound. It was deeper than that. It was the silence of every being in the room holding their breath at the same time. The silence of predators realizing they might not be at the top of the food chain after all. Gus stood in front of the carrier, his body low and tense, that rumbling sound still emanating from his chest. His dark eyes were fixed on with absolute focus. There was no fear in those eyes, no hesitation, only calculation. The ancient, patient calculation of a predator deciding exactly how to take down its target. Stepped backward. His compound eyes had gone wide, reflecting the floating lights in fractured patterns. His limbs moved jerkily, as if his body was responding to instincts he did not know he had. "What is happening?" the counselor asked. His translator rendered his voice as shaky, uncertain. "Why do I feel this way?" Danny understood. He had felt it himself, the first time he had heard a wolverine vocalize in the wild. That primal recognition that every species carried buried deep in their genes. The knowledge that something nearby was dangerous. Something nearby was not afraid. Something nearby would fight to the death without a second thought. His gelatinous body had contracted, pulling into itself like a frightened snail retreating into its shell. The diplomat was trying to make himself smaller, though Danny doubted was even aware of it. Had moved back several steps, her crystalline body vibrating at a frequency that sounded almost like a whimper. The rainbows she cast on the floor were flickering and unstable. Other aliens throughout the room had frozen in place. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Movement had ceased. Every compound eye, every sensory organ, every receptor capable of detecting danger was focused on the small brown creature standing calmly at Danny's feet. "This is Gus," Danny said. His voice was steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "His scientific name is, in Latin it means glutton. We call his species wolverines. On Earth, they are considered one of the most dangerous animals for their size." He paused, letting that sink in. "For their size," repeated slowly. "And how dangerous are the larger creatures on your world?" Danny almost smiled. "More dangerous than you want to know." Gus's rumbling faded to silence, but his posture did not relax. His ears remained flat. His muscles remained coiled. He was still ready, still waiting. If any of these aliens made the wrong move, he would attack. It would not matter that they were larger than him. It would not matter that they outnumbered him. Gus did not understand those concepts. He only understood that something had challenged him, and he did not accept challenges. "On my planet," Danny continued, "wolverines have been documented killing animals 20 times their size. Moose, caribou, young bears, they don't hunt the way other predators do. They don't pick off the weak and the sick. They attack whatever they want whenever they want, because they can." He looked around at the gathered aliens, meeting their eyes one by one. Scientists have studied wolverines for decades. They put them in brain scanners, ran tests on their neural chemistry. Do you know what they found? No one answered. "The part of the brain that processes fear," Danny said, "barely functions in wolverines. They have almost no fear response. None. They are physically incapable of being afraid. When a wolverine faces a threat, it doesn't run. It doesn't hide. It attacks. Every single time." His antennae were pressed flat against his skull now, a posture Danny had not seen before. The mighty counselor, representative of one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, looked like he wanted to crawl under a table. "That is not possible," said, her chiming voice strained. "Every species has a fear response. It is necessary for survival. Evolution requires it." "Not on Earth," Danny replied. "On Earth, some creatures evolved a different strategy. Instead of running from danger, they became the danger. Wolverines, honey badgers, hippopotamuses, cassowaries. These are animals that decided fear was not worth the effort. They survive not by avoiding threats, but by being more threatening than anything else." He knelt beside Gus and extended his hand slowly. The wolverine sniffed it once, then allowed Danny to scratch behind his ears. It was a gesture of trust that had taken 2 years to build, 2 years of patience and care and respect, 2 years of proving to this wild, fearless creature that Danny was not a threat. "Humans share their planet with these animals," Danny said, still scratching Gus's ears. "We always have. When our ancestors first came down from the trees, they had to deal with predators that could kill them without effort. Lions, wolves, crocodiles, things with claws and fangs and no reason to fear a bunch of hairless apes who couldn't run very fast." He stood again, keeping one hand near Gus in case the Wolverine decided to do something unexpected. But we survived. We didn't just survive, we thrived. We spread across every continent into every environment from frozen tundra to burning deserts. We encountered new predators everywhere we went and we dealt with them, not by hiding, not by running, by facing them. Finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you face creatures like this? Danny looked at the. We learned, we studied them, we figured out how they thought, how they hunted, what they feared. And then we used that knowledge against them. We built tools, we made weapons. We worked together in groups that predators couldn't handle. And sometimes we did something even stranger. He paused. Sometimes we made them our friends. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of beings trying to understand something that did not fit into their view of the universe. We took wolves, the pack hunters that had stalked our ancestors for thousands of generations, and we made them into dogs, Danny said. We took horses, powerful beasts that could trample us to death, and we rode them into battle. We caught falcons and hawks and eagles, predators that could take out our eyes with a single strike, and we trained them to hunt for us. He looked at directly. We didn't eliminate the dangerous creatures on our world, counselor. We partnered with them. We formed bonds with beings that could kill us at any moment, and we trusted them, because on Earth, that is what it takes to survive. Gus chose that moment to yawn. His mouth opened wide, displaying every single one of his bone-crushing teeth. The aliens nearest to him flinched backward. Danny smiled. You asked what makes humans special, he said. This is it. We come from a world where everything can kill you. The plants are poisonous. The insects carry disease. The water hides creatures with more teeth than you can count. And somehow, despite all of that, we made it here. We made it to the stars. He looked around the grand atrium one more time. So before you mock humanity again, remember this. Every human you meet grew up on a death world. We learned to walk while surrounded by predators. We learned to think while fighting for survival every single day. And we brought that with us when we left Earth. He looked down at Gus, who had finally relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained watchful. All of it. Reception continued after that, but it was not the same. The aliens who had gathered to mock the human delegate now kept their distance. They watched Danny from across the room with expressions he could not quite read. Fear, perhaps, or confusion, or something that might have been the beginning of respect. Ambassador found him near the refreshment table an hour later. Gus was back in his carrier, sleeping peacefully as if he had not just terrified an entire room full of advanced alien species. That was quite a performance, said quietly. It wasn't a performance, Danny replied. I just told them the truth. Studied him for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose you did. A chime sounded through the atrium, indicating that the reception was ending. Aliens began moving toward the exits, their conversations muted and thoughtful. Danny noticed that many of them glanced in his direction as they passed. None of them met his eyes. Approached before leaving. The counselor moved differently now, his segmented body held low and careful instead of tall and proud. His antennae were still pressed flat against his skull. Human said, I wish to acknowledge something. Danny waited. In thousands of years of interstellar travel, my species has encountered many forms of life. We have seen predators that could swallow our ships whole. We have seen hive minds that span entire planets. We have seen beings of pure energy that exist outside normal space. Paused. But we have never felt what I felt tonight. And what was that? His compound eyes flickered. Fear. Genuine, instinctive fear, from a creature that weighs less than my smallest limb. He looked at the carrier where Gus was sleeping. Your world has produced something remarkable, continued. Something that speaks to the oldest parts of our minds, parts we did not know we had. I do not fully understand it, but I acknowledge it. Danny nodded. That's a start. Left without another word, other aliens followed, each of them taking the long way around Danny and his carrier. The days that followed were different from what Danny had expected. He had come to the summit as a last-minute replacement, a nobody from a backwater planet with no experience in galactic politics. He had expected to be ignored at best, mocked at worst. Instead, aliens sought him out. They wanted to talk. They wanted to ask questions about Earth, about its creatures, about how humanity had survived in such a dangerous environment. They approached him with a new kind of interest, not the amused curiosity of superiors examining primitives, but the genuine fascination of beings encountering something they did not understand. Was one of the first. The diplomat found Danny in a quiet corridor between sessions. "I have been researching your planet," said, his voice less confident than before. "The creatures you described, wolverines, honey badgers, I looked them up in your public databases." Danny nodded. "And what did you find?" "Madness." His gelatinous body quivered. "Your planet is filled with madness. Creatures that fight predators many times their size. Insects that can kill with a single sting. Fish that carry enough venom to kill hundreds of beings. And you live among these things, every day, without protective barriers, without safety measures." "We manage," Danny said. "But how? How does your species survive?" Danny thought about it for a moment. "We adapted, we learned, and we never gave up. That's really all there is to it." Was silent for a long moment. Then he made a sound that Danny's translator identified as profound contemplation. "Perhaps we have underestimated your kind," the said finally. The summit lasted 5 more days. During that time, Danny attended meetings and discussions that should have been far above his qualifications. But when he spoke, people listened. When he offered opinions, they were considered seriously. The representatives of ancient civilizations who had traveled between stars while humanity was still learning to make fire now treated him as an equal. Gus spent most of his time sleeping in the corner of Danny's quarters. Occasionally, Danny would take him out for walks through the station's corridors. Word had spread about the small Earth creature that had silenced an entire diplomatic reception. Aliens stepped aside when they saw them coming. Some nodded in greeting. None tried to mock. On the last day of the summit, Danny found himself standing before the full assembly. The representatives of all 12 species were gathered in a great circular chamber, their seats arranged in tiers that rose toward the ceiling. Hundreds of eyes watched him as he walked to the central podium. He had not expected to give a speech, but the assembly had requested it. They wanted to hear from the human who had brought a Wolverine to a diplomatic summit. Danny stood at the podium and looked out at the gathered aliens. He saw in the section, his compound eyes fixed on Danny with something that might have been respect. He saw his gelatinous bulk in the seats. He saw his crystalline form catching the light. "I came to this summit by accident," Danny began. "I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a politician. I'm just a guy who takes care of injured animals back home. I had no idea what I was doing when I arrived here. To be honest, I still don't." A ripple of something moved through the crowd. Not quite laughter, something gentler. "But I learned something during my time here. I learned that the galaxy sees humanity as newcomers, primitives, a species that barely figured out how to leave their own planet. And in a lot of ways, that's true. Your civilizations are older than ours. Your technology is more advanced. Your ships can do things ours can only dream of." Danny paused. "But we have something you don't. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day of our existence. A world where the weather can freeze you solid or burn you alive. A world where creatures with fangs and claws and venom hunted us from the moment we first stood upright. And we didn't just survive that world. We conquered it." He thought about Gus, sleeping peacefully back in his quarters. "We formed partnerships with predators. We crossed oceans and deserts and mountains that should have killed us. We kept going when logic said we should stop. And we made it here. Not because we were the strongest or the most advanced, but because we were too stubborn to give up. Danny looked around the chamber one more time. That's what humanity brings to the galaxy. Not advanced technology, not ancient wisdom, just a refusal to accept defeat, a willingness to face anything, no matter how dangerous, and a planet full of creatures that taught us what it really means to be fearless. He stepped back from the podium. The assembly was silent for a long moment. Then slowly sound began to fill the chamber, clicking, humming, rumbling, chiming. The sounds of a dozen different species expressing approval in a dozen different ways. Later that evening, Danny returned to his quarters for the last time. His shuttle back to Earth would leave in a few hours. He found Gus awake, watching him from the corner with those dark, steady eyes. Danny sat on the floor beside him. He did not try to touch the Wolverine. He had learned long ago that Gus would accept contact when he wanted it and not a moment before. "We did okay, buddy," Danny said quietly. "We did okay." Gus made a low, grumbling sound. It was not the threatening growl he had used at the reception. It was softer, warmer, the closest thing a Wolverine could make to a sound of contentment. Danny smiled. Outside the window, the nebula continued its slow swirl of purple and gold. Somewhere out there, countless stars held countless worlds with countless species, and on one small blue planet, humans continued doing what they had always done. Surviving, adapting, refusing to be afraid. And occasionally, forming unlikely friendships with creatures that had no business being anyone's friend. Danny stood and began packing his things. Gus watched him for a moment, then curled up and went back to sleep. They had a long journey home ahead of them. But Danny had a feeling this was only the beginning.